Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sheen Center Online. I'm David DeSerto, Interim Executive Director here at the Sheen Center. And the Sheen Center is a project of the Archdiocese of New York. And this is our weekly Faith, Hope, and Love online series. The series is our free public content that we're offering weekly while we are unable to gather together down at the Sheen Center. We extend a big thank you to our friends at the National Review Institute for co-sponsoring today's event. And of course, a big thanks to you for watching. As always, we encourage you to post questions or comments. And if you haven't already, we encourage you to subscribe to our Sheen Talks YouTube channel and be sure to click that bell icon so you can be notified of upcoming videos. Now, the author Robert Louis Stevenson once said that a saint is simply a sinner who keeps trying. And that wonderful definition was certainly embodied by Frank Simmonds, whose redemptive story is recounted by his widow, author and poet Rita A. Simmonds, in her powerful and deeply personal new book, Convicted by Mercy: The Journey of Frank Simmonds from the Streets to Sanctity. But before we bring Rita on, as always, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator and dear friend of the Sheen Center, Kathryn Jean Lopez. Kathryn is Senior Fellow at the National Review Institute and Editor-at-Large of the National Review and author of A Year with the Mystics, Visionary Wisdom for Daily Living. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you so much, David. I'm getting used to these virtual forums. We didn't all expect this to last as long as it did, that's for sure. Well, thank you again. I am so excited about today's event. I have been wanting to do this with Rita for forever. And so I am so grateful for the opportunity. And so with no further ado, you can see I'm very bad at responding to producers' questions in the comment box. That's what was just happening. With no further ado, I would like to welcome Rita to the conversation here. As David mentioned, Rita is a poet, and she's the author of this beautiful new book, Convicted by Mercy. And Rita, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, and I hope that it's some consolation to be able to talk about Frank on the week of your anniversary. I didn't fully realize that until I was rereading the book, and also that it's the feast of St. Mary Magdalene, which we didn't plan to do this all. You know, it seems like God provides and sends little messages to us that, yeah, He really has a plan, even when life is so painful and uncertain. And so thank you again for joining us. And I should mention too, in addition to talking about Convicted by Mercy, and I'm doing a bad job here, we also will talk a little bit about He Called, your Magnificat book of poetry. And I look forward to that. I think so much of what you write about, Rita, both in your poetry that appears in Magnificat so frequently, and in this book about Frank's life, is, you know, the key to it all, right? We need to accept God's mercy, to ask for God's mercy, accept God's mercy, and be merciful to one another. And things might look a little bit different in our lives and in the world. And so, Rita, could you start by telling us a little, set us up for the video we're about to take a look at, to hear Frank in his own words.
Okay, well, this video was taken at New York Encounter a year before Frank passed away. He'd already had neuroendocrine carcinoma, and you know, he was quite sick actually in the video. But you know, Frank was a trooper, and he really wanted to give this witness to his people, and he wanted to tell his story of what happened to him in his life. And so he starts out by talking about how his mother was his world. He was very close to his mother. He grew up in Amityville, Long Island. He was born 1955, January 20th, 1955. His parents were from the Virgin Islands, and he was very well loved. He was the youngest of 5 siblings, and he was the only child of his father, Francis Simmonds. And his mother had cancer when Frank was 17, and she passed away. And he said, "My mother was my world." And so when his mother died, though he had been raised Roman Catholic, he turned his back on his faith because he had really hoped that God was going to heal his mother. And he prayed for his mother to be healed. And she was not. She passed away. So that's kind of what he starts out saying in this episode from the encounter. And then he goes on to tell his story.
And so I think we're going to see that right now.
One night, I had sold my coat, sold my shoes. I was sitting in an abandoned building on the steps. I had no money, nothing to get any more drugs with. And I said, well, I just rob the next guy that's coming by, and then I'll just keep moving. I'll get another pair of shoes, And I hear footsteps. So I'm like, oh, good. I look around, and here's this guy, do-de-do, coming up the sidewalk. I said, perfect. I got it. As he got closer, he was wearing black, and he had something white by his neck. And I was like, oh, man, it's really getting bad now. I'm about to rob a priest, man. Dang, man, how low can you go, you know? Anyway, as he got closer, I said, you know what? Let me give him a break. If he don't say nothing to me, I'm gonna let him go. I'll find another guy. He goes by, do-de-do, and he stops right at the corner. I'm like, here it goes. And he turns around and he says, young man, if you think God is gonna come and lay down here with you in the gutter, he won't. You know why? Because he's holy. He said, but if you ask him, he'll come and take you out of this gutter. And I said, man, you better get to stepping, man, because I'm ready to jump on you now, you know what I mean? Go. And as he went up the street and turned the corner, and it wasn't far, I said, forget it, I'm gonna rob him. So I went running around the corner, he was gone. I looked, there was no lights on and nobody, he was gone. And it tortured me it tortured me so bad. I felt so exposed for what I really was because I didn't even think I was a person then. I didn't even know what a person was. I don't even think I knew what love was. I didn't love myself. So I was tortured and tortured and tortured. And I said, you know what, I can't take this. It's like one of those Wolfman movies. The full moon comes up, I turn into this monster, but when do I turn back into me? I'm the monster all the time. I couldn't take it. So I wanted to end it. I come up with brilliant ideas when I think by myself. Suicide! Hey, yeah, that'll put an end to everything. As I'm coming up the street, I'm gonna go to the train station and jump in front of a train. Brilliant. And as I was walking up the street, I was yelling at God, saying, you're not real. You're not real. You're not real. You're that picture on the wall. Let me see you stop me from what I'm about to do right now. You know, you're all that powerful, you all stop me. And as I was walking, I can't believe this. Something, it cried out from inside of me. It cried out and said, and it came through my mouth. It said, God, if you stop me from what I'm about to do, I will serve you for the rest of my life. And I was like, what? What is this? And I thought of a guy that told me, he says, look, if you really get into real deep trouble, call this number, 1-800-WE-DETOX or whatever. And it's just so convenient that there's this phone there. And I went to the phone. It was a toll-free number. I dialed it and called it. I said, man, I'm a drug addict. It's really hopeless. I don't know why I'm making this phone call, but I'm about to kill myself. Help me. They took me to a hospital, and it was like a rehab. And I said, this hospital looks familiar. Yeah, they said, yeah, this used to be Hempstead General Hospital and whatever. And I was in shock. Hempstead General Hospital was where my dead mother worked. And I realized right then and there that someone still loved me, even though they weren't present. And what is it that the heart is really looking for? Isn't it looking for love and relationship? Right then I encountered the very thing that I wasn't aware of. And I'm still living it now. It doesn't end. I'm living in it now, and it just happens that I'm here with you.
What a gift to be able to hear from Frank in his own words. What he was talking about hits to the heart of so much of the pain in the world today. How many people don't love themselves, don't think that they're a person, don't think other people are people worthy of value. First of all, Rita, what would you say to anyone who has thoughts like this, who may be watching right now?
I would say that you are lovable, you know. And I think, yeah, that is a very difficult problem in the time that we're living, is this lack of value that people have for themselves and for others. And I think that for me in my life, it was always the love of my family first, and then later on the love of my friends, you know, in community. I think that, you know, people, you know, we first ourselves, we have to look around, and we have to be willing to recognize those in our own families who are looking, you know, who are in need of our love and of our support. And then also, but we also need to be loved and supported. So what is it? We all should be asking ourselves the question, you know, who is it that loves and supports me? You know, and you know, making moves towards, you know, the people that love and support us, finding ways to really be in communion with those, you know, who help us and love and support us, because that's really what we need more than anything in life, I think.
And so much of your book on Frank's life is about community. I was struck by that from the beginning. There, I see names of mutual friends that we have, and you always seem to be surrounded by, even if you didn't know what your next step was or what God was calling to you, you were always surrounded by community, and that is so essential. Finding that community and treasuring that community and seeking help and wisdom and from people who are prayers, who are close to God. You know, actually just yesterday a priest was in the homily talking about sometimes the people who are close to God wind up becoming your family in so many regards, and you have many people in your life who are exactly like that, as you write about in the book. Was the community essential to Frank being able to get out of the place that he was in? Addiction, homelessness, depression, despair, crime.
Well, when Frank and I first met, he was still in the throes of drug addiction, but I didn't know that, and my friend David, our mutual friend David, he didn't know that either. But that came out, that video that we just saw, that event that he described, that happened after I had invited Frank to come to my house where I was living with some friends for Thanksgiving dinner. David had asked me, he said, you know, I'm going to Albany for Thanksgiving. Frank doesn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving. Could you invite him? And I did invite him, and he was really very moved by my invitation. And then he said, but I'm sorry, I can't accept. And that was the night, that he went out and, had that encounter that he described so dramatically, because it was a very dramatic encounter. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that Dave and I, we definitely were in Frank's corner. We loved him. He was a tremendous guy. Even under the influence of drugs, you could still see that this was a man who was searching. We recognized that in him. And he was very helpful and valuable to Frank also, because he worked at a satellite on the Volunteers of America satellite on the George Washington Bridge, and Frank was like his intern. Frank was living on Ward's Island, but he served as David's intern, and he was David's right hand, because the people that would come to the Volunteers of America for help, they were addicts, people with mental illness, homelessness, all kinds of trouble. And Frank was really a great help to Dave. So, even, like I say, even in those early stages, there was a mutual respect and affection for each other. And then, we were friends, the three of us, and, we stayed in touch when Frank got help, and then he went into a rehab program. We stayed in touch, and Frank never went back to drugs after that night that he describes. And I think that I was supported by my community, so I was able to be a friend to Frank because of the support that I had received. So yeah, I think that the community was very important. Then when Frank and I became more than friends, and then we decided to get married, then definitely the support of the community. Monsignor Albacete in particular, who's the priest that's sitting next to Frank in that video, he was a tremendous friend to us. He was a member of our community. He passed away 3 months before Frank did, but he helped me very much in our pre-Cana, in our courtship, in our married life together. So, as well as, some of the friends in the community, definitely. So we always had a circle of friends around us, helping us. It was very mutual. We helped each other. We prayed for each other. We shared our life in common. We did a lot of things together, vacations together, taking care of our kids together, studying, and birthday parties, baptisms, weddings. We lived a life in common, and yes, that was very beautiful and helpful.
Can you just mention briefly for anyone who isn't aware, the community that you're talking about is Communion and Liberation. Monsignor Albacete was sort of a giant of that community. It's a movement in the church. It sponsors that New York Encounter where the video was from, which is this beautiful arts festival every January or every winter. Anyway, I think it was February this year.
Yes.
But, could you just say briefly what Communion and Liberation is and why it's been important to your life and this story that you're telling of mercy?
Well, Communion and Liberation was founded in 1954 by an Italian priest named Monsignor Luigi Giussani. And Father Giussani was struck in the negative sense by the fact that so many of the young people, they all wore their Catholic action pins, but they didn't really have a true understanding of the faith. And so he was a brilliant theologian, philosopher, you name it. And yet he decided to stay and teach high school because he really wanted to educate the young people in their faith. And so he started with just a small group of young people, and it grew and grew and grew over the years. And then it spread to I don't know how many countries all over the world. I encountered communion and liberation in 1988 in New York City. And I went there with a friend of mine, Father Rich Veras, before he was Father Rich Veras. And then we met other friends, and we just stayed with the community. And basically, we have a weekly meeting, which is called the School of Community, where we study the writings of Father Giussani, or our now president, Father Julian Caron. And we read the writings, and then we compare what is being said to what we experience in our life. So it's really a work of freedom and judgment, about what is going on in our experience, and how does that relate to what we need in our life, and what are our true desires, what we're looking for, because Christ is really the answer to our human desires. So we try to figure that out, verify that, move along that path.
Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, actually, Pope Francis does too, echoes this, but Pope Benedict talked a lot about the importance of the movements in the church, these different flavors, varieties of Catholicism, and really routes to really fully live the Catholic life. And I'm not a member of Communion and Liberation, but every time I'm around a community of CL people one-on-one even, there is this exactly this answer to what Frank was talking about, what he was struggling with so much, the sense that, maybe because of your sins, because of your weaknesses, all of these things, because of the circumstances you find yourself at a given moment, you confuse that for your identity and who you are. And CL has a way of just lifting you out of that, and helping you see that God made you, and He made you for something great. And that may not be reforming all the problems of the world. It may be showing love in the little part of the world that you're in. But there's great beauty. And one thing I wanted to ask you, Rita. So why did you think it was so important to write this book? Because obviously, you besides your writing, and you have two boys, you have other things to be doing. These are deeply personal things that you write about in the book. Why did you think it was so important to do it?
Well, Frank's story was remarkable. Not very many people, go from such a terrible and difficult life. He lived on the streets. He was addicted to crack. He went through being incarcerated, in and out of rehabs. He was thrown in a dumpster once by his so-called friends when he had a seizure on the street. He had suffered a lot in his life, and he said, just when you think you can't fall any further, a trap door opens up, so he really hit rock bottom. And then to see how he died, as a king, he really died a death of great dignity, and he was surrounded, and he radiated the love of Christ. So, I really wanted to give people hope. I wanted people to see that it's not what we're able to accomplish that makes us great, but it's what He, Christ, is able to accomplish in us and through us. And that's really, that was really Frank's life. He was a man who was completely and totally disposed to Christ. he really hungered for Christ's love, and when he found that, when he understood that he was called into existence by a great love, when he knew that he was loved. I mean, he grabbed a hold of that, you know, and he was willing to do anything, to go through anything, to affirm that love.
I'm going to go a little backward here and ask you to talk, before you talk about his conversion and how he came to that relationship with Christ. Could you talk about the end of his life there? Because again, this is such a pressing issue in the world today. You know, the idea that the death with dignity is choosing to end things earlier, cut off suffering. None of us like to suffer. I'm not going to pretend I do. Why did Frank not give up? Why and why is it important to suffer to the end and be with people till the end? As you say, there's something of God there. How do you know that? And why is this so? Why are those days some of the most precious of our lives?
Those were definitely beautiful days, I have to say. Because Frank went very early on in our relationship, actually, you know, just the two of us being together, there was just suffering built into that because we were just two very different people. We have two very different histories, and there was a lot of misunderstanding that we had to wade through. And we broke up 3 times. I mean, you'll read in the book all of the difficulties that we had in being together as a couple, but the love was always there. But sometimes it was just so hard to stay together. And I remember one time after we'd broken up the 3rd time, and I just missed him. I just went back to see him one day, and he was happy to see me again. And then I told him, I said, yeah, but you know, our problems are still the same. Like, we haven't really worked through, you know, our disagreements. And I said, but you know, maybe we can take all of the suffering that we have and just trying to be together as a couple and offer that to Christ and ask him to help us, you know, to be together if we really love each other and we want to keep going in our relationship. And, you know, I kind of expected Frank to roll his eyes or, you know, to poo-poo it, but he didn't. He just latched onto that. And not only did he latch onto it and say, yeah, we'll do that to help us to be together, but he said, and our suffering can help other people too. Like, it wasn't enough that it was just going to help us as a couple. Like, already he was thinking about other people that it could help. And that really struck me and that really amazed me. And so when he was diagnosed with cancer, what was that, 2011, I believe, 11 or 12, 2012, you know, he saw that. Oh, I'm sorry. Even before that, let's go back a little bit. Back in 2009, I think it was, he was asked by the director of the choir and the leader of the New York community at the time was Chris Vath. He's the leader of the choir, and he heads up the annual Way of the Cross over the Brooklyn Bridge on Good Friday. And he asked Frank, would Frank be willing to carry the cross in the procession? This is a big procession which started back in the 90s, and it's grown, and thousands of people come every year. And after 9/11, we added a stop at Ground Zero, and it's really a beautiful event that we do for the city of New York every Good Friday. And so Frank took that as a great honor to be able to carry that cross over the Brooklyn Bridge. And he started like gathering names and, you know, writing a list of people that he was praying for, putting it in his pocket, you know, offering that gesture for other people. You know, he was really animated by this possibility that anything that he did, you know, anything that he offered, you know, could be for the world, could help other people, you know. And he loved carrying the cross over the bridge. But then when he got cancer, you know, he was concerned that he wasn't going to be asked to carry the cross anymore. but Chris asked him, and he was so happy about it. He was so excited because he really felt like that was what he was born to do, was to carry the cross. And so even the last time, it was 2014, he'd been very sick. He had had a heart operation on top of the cancer. And Chris said, I don't think he's going to be able to carry that cross over the bridge. And I said, no, I don't think he will. And Chris said, well, maybe he can just hold the cross at the beginning, of the way of the cross, before we process, when we're just praying in the church. And I'll put a little table down. So if he needs to rest the cross on the table, he can do that. And so he proposed that to Frank, and then Frank was really grateful, and he did. He held that cross up. He never once rested it on the table, and he was just so grateful to be able to do that, for that gesture when he was so sick. And then when his illness got even more and more progressive, he never went back on his word. All that he suffered, emotionally and physically and spiritually, psychologically, in every way you can imagine that a dying person suffers, he offered all of that to Christ for the salvation of the world. And he did it, with great conviction.
That's about the most beautiful thing in the world, isn't it? It must have deepened your love for him. And did it draw you into depths of deeper love for others as well?
Definitely. We were a team, obviously I suffered too, because I had 2 kids, my husband was dying, and I had to watch him suffer. But there's a lot of meaning when you know what that suffering is for.
Mm-hmm.
You can carry that suffering when you know that it's for something that doesn't die, something that's infinite, something that's infinitely greater than the suffering. We don't go through it like, smiling and pretending that everything is great. You really do feel the weight of the suffering. Christ wasn't smiling from the cross, but he was loving from the cross, and he was desiring to love from the cross, and he was desiring our salvation from the cross. And I think that, Frank and I, we entered into that dynamic, that Christian dynamic, that redemptive dynamic.
What's so remarkable to me about you, Rita, is that every time I see you, you emanate joy. And you don't have to be, like you said, you don't have to be smiling and giddy, and, there's a confident joy about you. And that I can only imagine comes from the credibility of your life, the true suffering and the true offering it to Christ. So many of us today, see injustice, which includes the injustice of, death. That's not the way God intended for us to live, and get angry and get bitter, and, everything that we're seeing in the world today. For someone who might be listening to this, Rita, and they sort of think this sounds like a beautiful thing for a pious woman who wants to live that way, but it doesn't really seem real to them. Is there a little invitation you can make? Because, like, obviously, as we were talking about, Frank wasn't always in the place that he wound up. It's a journey, and how do you invite people into that?
Well, first of all, I think you have to be honest. You have to really admit what it is you want in life. And when, you have to do this work of judging, when proposals come to you, is that going to make me happy? You really have to ask yourself that question constantly. Is this for my happiness? Is this for my happiness? Is this for my good? And if it's hard to figure out, then you have to trust other people who know you and love you to help you. And I think that, that's kind of, it's a process. And you know, things get tough for me. I mean, I'm not always holding it together. It's difficult. You know, Frank had, you know, struggles in his life. He wasn't always holding it together either, but that's not the point. I mean, I think the point is that when we're falling apart, we know who it is that can pick up the pieces and put them back together again. And we trust that that's for real. We're not doing it ourselves. If I thought for 1 minute that I was able to pull myself up by my bootstraps and just move forward, then I would just collapse. But it's so much easier to just abandon yourself to Christ and say, okay, Christ, you know, this is what you put in front of me. So I trust that you're going to guide me through this. The suffering comes in, the suffering that we can't carry, I think, comes in when we try and do it our way a lot of times. Because if we're doing it his way, then he's going to give us what it is that we need to get through it. But it's a discernment process too. And that's why you need help, you need friends, you need prayer, you need grace, you need love for yourself. You need enough love for yourself that you're willing to do the work that it takes, you know, to be happy.
What is it that gives you confidence about all of that this is true?
Well, because I've seen it, I've experienced it in my life. I have never felt not accompanied. You know, even if I'm alone, I always recognize that he's with me just by virtue of the fact that I exist, that I breathe.
Mm.
Another is with me. Another is giving me that energy. I mean, I'm not existing on nothing. There's something that's creating me all the time, that's putting life and energy into me. So my very existence, your very existence, I mean, we're a gift to ourselves, we're a gift to others. Our existence is gift. We didn't create ourselves.
And sometimes that in itself is an act of faith, isn't it? When sometimes we're not feeling that so much, but we have to believe it's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think being loved, you know, being loved by a person, a human being, another like really being loved and being looked at and recognized. I think that was a very big gift. My husband was a great gift to me because he was able to look at me and love me. And I was able to look at him and love him. And we need that. We need someone to see us, to recognize us, to love us. And we have to go after that in our life. A lot of people, they just give up. But we have to go after love. We have to put ourselves in love's way. You know, people put themselves in harm's way. Put yourself in love's way.
Mm. Well, one reason your book is so important, I think, is because of the witness of married life, which, as you say, isn't easy. You know, we're made differently. We have different experiences, and so the coming together has its obvious benefits, but also it's a real work, a real labor, a labor of love, obviously. But in the world today, it can be so easy to not even engage in that, not even make that commitment, but also to give up, because there are so many. Our culture sort of encourages that sometimes, but it's the most important work in the world, marriage and family. And so thank you for that part of the witness in this book and in talking to us today. I should say to our listeners, to our audience, that feel free to make comments and to put some questions in the comment section. I'll weave that into the conversation as we continue. And Rita, I want to ask you for a moment about your poetry and poetry and the arts. And this is something that you and Frank had in common. It's some of your community life as well. I'm struck by, in addition to the joy you exude, just the beauty that you create in your writing. And so many people have experienced that who read Magnificat monthly. And can you talk a little bit about the importance of beauty? And can you talk about just how you started writing poetry in the first place and where you get your inspiration from?
Well, I started writing poetry a very long time ago. When I was in 4th grade, I wrote a poem. Our teacher gave, I knew about poetry because my mother used to recite little poems to us all the time, as when we were kids. And then, of course, just growing up Catholic, the liturgy is very poetic. The Psalms, the gospel is full of metaphor. I was always very struck by all of that and the sounds of words and how they came together. So when I was in 4th grade, Mrs. Snyder said, okay, everybody write a poem, but she didn't really tell us how to do it. She just like, just rhyme it, blah, 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 whatever. And so I was just looking out the window. I remember it was snowing. And so I just wrote this poem about this snowflake, and I handed it in and she said, did you really write this? And I told her, yes, no, you copied it. How could you have written this? Like she was really, and so I was starting to doubt myself, like maybe I did copy it. I don't know. Maybe I heard it somewhere. Like I was just really racking my brain to try and figure out if I'd copied the poem from somewhere. And she ended up giving the poem to the principal. And he called me down to his office, Mr. Beardsley, his name was. And he said, did you write this poem? And I said, yes. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And he said, okay, well, we love this poem and we're going to publish it in our school newspaper. And so I was like, oh, okay, thank you. And I was like, phew, So I went back to class and I was so thrilled that he liked my poem and he was going to publish it in the school newspaper that I started writing poems like crazy. And so I took one up to Mrs. Snyder and I gave it to her. And she said, just stop it. That's enough. And she just like threw it back at me. And so I didn't write another thing for years after that. Probably when I was in college, I wrote a little bit, about, being a tortured young woman and, so it was very kind of, navel gazing type stuff. And then probably in like 1994, I think, I started writing again because I was dating a guy who also liked poetry or something. So we would write poetry back and forth with each other. And then I met Father Peter and I'd written a lot of poems. And
Father Peter Cameron.
Father Peter Cameron, yes.
Peter John Cameron.
Yes. And he invited me to be a part of this play that he wrote about the life of Saint Therese, the Sacrament of Memory. And I didn't have anything to audition with, but I had a bunch of poems that I'd written. And so I started, I asked him, could I read those poems as my audition? And he said, sure. And so I started reading him my poetry and he was loving it, So of course I kept reading and getting more dramatic as time went on, And so he said, oh, send me your poems. And then he started publishing my poetry in Magnificat. And so that's when I kind of had to start taking it seriously and really start studying and finding out, all about, my gift and developing that. So that's kind of really how it came about. And now it really is the way that I love to express myself.
So it is a bit of a labor of love.
It's a labor. It's a labor. And it is what I love. I have to really put my mind to it. I can't, it's not something that, sometimes things come easily, but usually I've got to sit down and think and focus and stare at things,
Well, and that's what you just described as another great gift that we can give people when we can identify the gift, and really love them and love that gift and help bring it out in people, which it sounds like that's what Father Cameron did for you. And
I always tell Father Peter that. I always say, that without you, this wouldn't be going on. Even the book about Frank, He said, oh, just write 100 words a day. And I'm like, what? So I did. I started writing 100 words a day. And lo and behold, there you have it. But he was always in my corner, and he was always kind of pushing me. And I needed that. I needed a friend to kind of push me. Without that, I don't think any of it would have happened, to be quite honest. But there again, you have it, the friendship. It's
Right.
not just about, praying for each other, but sometimes it's really about recognizing the good in each other and bringing that forward.
And being honest and being together on the journey to heaven, back to God who made us. One of the things that you write in the book is there's a comment by somebody named Jonathan about Frank, and he
Jonathan
said, sorry,
my brother-in-law, Jonathan Fields.
He said everyone could love Frank because Frank loved everyone's freedom. And you mentioned, Rita, earlier, freedom as part of the gift of communion liberation. What is freedom? What was it about Frank and respecting people's freedom and loving people's freedom that is so important and such an example to the rest of us?
Well, right now, when you say the word freedom, I think of Father Giussani's definition, which is freedom is the capacity for the infinite. Freedom is the satisfaction of a desire, and our desire is for the infinite. So it's the capacity for the infinite. That's what Father Giussani taught us, and of course we verify that, over the years. Because when you feel free, you feel free when you have a desire, and the desire is satisfied. So what is our real desire? I mean, I think that's that's what we have to get down to. That's what we have to discover. So freedom was very important in Frank's life, because he was not the person that you could tell do this or do that. I mean, he really had to. He always said, "Oh, I'm a doubting Thomas. I have to put my hands in the nail marks and in the side of Jesus." So he really was a man that loved the possibility to verify if things were true or if they were not true. And so that's the difference between like Christianity and a Jim Jones cult, right? We verify if things are right for us, if things are true for us. And Monsignor Albacete was very big on that also, and so I think that the reason why one of the reasons why Frank was such an attractive person is because he did things because he wanted to do them, because it was out of his freedom, it was out of his love, it was his will. His will was engaged and in action. He wasn't just, and he was never just resigned to death either. When he got cancer, he really went into motion. He really tried everything that he could try to stay alive, to not have to die. He fought and he struggled. So he really was a man of freedom and desire.
You mentioned that you had different backgrounds, different experiences, and one obvious one is that you had different color skin, right? How did that play into your story? And in particular, I ask you, obviously, because of what's going on in the country right now, with the race riots we've had, and so much of the anger and regret and every emotion, it seems, that's mixed in.
Well, as Christians, right, we know that there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free man, neither man nor woman, but we're all one in Christ Jesus. And I think that, Frank and I were one. We were one. We were one in Christ Jesus. And yeah, we were different, that's for sure. But that difference didn't stop us from being one, from being united. So I think that, as far as what's going on now in the world, I think the Christians have to be Christians and recognize that we're one, And the more we affirm what's already been given to us, the more easily, or the better, let's say, we're going to be able to face the situations that we have to face in our culture. But I don't have any doubt that Frank and I were one, and that I'm one with my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. It doesn't matter. We have to accept each other as gift, as given, with our differences. The differences are good. The challenges are good. They help us they stretch us. They enable us to love each other more and better. So I don't, but when you know that you really belong to that person, then the differences become more of a fascination than an obstacle.
One of the reasons I think that your book is so important and so beautiful, thank you for writing it, is because of some of Frank's story of being homeless, of being addicted, of being ready to rob a priest. How many times, particularly those who live in urban settings, there are men on the street, and sometimes they're kind, sometimes they're angry, but it's so important to remember that God created them, and even if they're swearing at you, even if they're saying something inappropriate, there's something of God in there, and sometimes, I sometimes hope that a little smile anyway, or a little prayer whispered might be a little contribution, into helping him see that he's not this monster, to use Frank's word, that he thinks he is. And to thank you for that, Rita, that reminder. And one thing I want to ask before I ask you to read one of your poems from he calls the Magnificat Collection. You write that early on in the book that Frank's life highlights an important question: what makes us saints, our capacity or God's mercy? I believe after reading Frank's story, more people will realize their own call and possibility for sanctity. So what do you call him a saint? What made him a saint? And how can the rest of us follow suit?
What makes us saints is God's grace, his love, and his mercy, not our capacity. And I think that the less we're capable, the better off we are.
Thank God I am totally incompetent.
So, I mean, Frank would have said it. He said it a million times. I'm nothing great. I'm nothing special. But we are his. He's claimed us. We're his. You don't have to try to be his. You just are.
Mm.
You live that confidence because it's true. It's a matter of knowledge. We're his. Mm-hmm. We belong to him.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank had a lot of confidence in that.
What gave him that confidence?
Because he knew it wasn't his capacity, because he screwed up royally. She screwed up royally. I mean, the damage that he did in his life, he couldn't have undone. There was nothing that he could have done to make himself righteous. It had to be what was done unto him.
So why do you call him a saint?
Well, I don't want to call him a saint, because he's not officially canonized by the church, but
But Pope Francis talks about all those hidden saints who are not canonized, who are, maybe our grandmother or
right,
our husband.
Right. Well, first of all, he would hate it if people were calling him a saint. Okay, let's just have that clear, because he said.
Dorothy Day was pretty clear on that too.
What?
Dorothy Day was pretty clear on this point too.
Yeah, but he said, I'm Frank. I'm not St. Francis. Like, he said that all the time, because Frank didn't fit the mold of the stories that we read in the lives of the saints, oftentimes, that are very kind of doctored up or made very, kind of unrealistic in a lot of ways, like that everything was like, when people were just like floating through life. And, he wasn't that kind of a guy. He was very real. He was very down to earth.
No levitation.
He was very flawed, even after his conversion. He was very flawed. He had a lot of bad habits. He wasn't perfect. But what I think was exceptional in Frank, especially at the end of his life, is that he was, you know how people are possessed by evil? He was possessed by good.
Mm.
It filled his being. And it was something that he wanted and that he chose. It wasn't like God just, came down on it, but he desired more and more of God's grace, and he got it, and he radiated God's love and mercy. He never refused mercy to anyone. And people, when he was dying, there were lines and lines and lines of people who came to see him, all to receive mercy. They all wanted to be looked at with mercy. There were people, they just knew that they could talk to Frank and they could be who they were, and Frank could know them for who they were and what they'd done, and it didn't faze him one bit. He really didn't care. You could tell him you just robbed the grocery store. He'd be like, well, man, that's rough, but okay, well, it wasn't going to make him push you away from him. He was not scandalized at all by humanness in any way, shape, or form. And so I think that was one of the great draws. And I think it's still true. I think that Frank is still, he's still calling people. He's still drawing people to Christ, through this example and this witness of incredible mercy that was shown him. You said Mary Magdalene. Today's the Feast of Mary Magdalene. We think that Mary Magdalene wasn't a bad person. She probably really was. She probably did a lot of bad things, a lot of underhanded, nasty, evil things. But she didn't die that way.
Right.
And neither did Frank.
Well, two of my favorite things that you said, but there's so much, Rita, is that we need Christians to be Christians. And I think my prayer for today is to be possessed by God's goodness, like Frank was. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you end us with one of your poems?
Yes, I have to bring it up on my screen, okay? So okay. If I hope I'm not going to disappear here. Let's see what happens. Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hand you my copy of the book.
Okay. So you like this poem, Kathryn. So, and I like it too. I think it's a good choice. It's called Awaiting, and it is a sonnet. Eternity is something to be sought in faces, walls, and windows, dawn to dusk, or even in the midnight hour caught by those who hear a cry acute and hushed, or see a single star that weakens strife of rich and poor together on the road that ends at the beginning of a life, as flesh as it is timeless and of old. The angels wing to wing above the crowd that gathers at the cavern, not the inn, explode in joyful chorus like a cloud that rains all it contains on foes and friends. Let every inn be open as a cave. Eternity awaited now awaits.
Thank you so much, Rita. I thought that was a hopeful kind of note to end on. And this whole hour has been about hope and God's mercy. And thank you for the beauty that you bring to the world. And thank you for you, Rita, bringing people to Christ and deeper into his heart by your words and by your testimony and by you writing Frank's story and your story. It's both of your stories, your son's stories. And so thank you so much, Rita, for that gift that you give us and you keep giving. Thank you so much.
If people have questions or something that we don't have time, they can always write to me on my website there that you put up, RitaASimmons.com. And thank you, Kathryn and David and all of the wonderful folks at the Sheen Center. This is a great privilege, and I hope to be in touch.
Well, and I want to say in a closing note before David gets back on, I'm grateful, first of all, again, to Rita. I'm so grateful to Magnificat, which publishes her. I mentioned I'm grateful to your community, Communion Liberation. It brings so much of Christ's beauty to the world. I'm also grateful to the Sheen Center for this Faith, Hope, and Love series that this is my last contribution to. We've done a few events together. And that's exactly what we need to be focusing on in these days of uncertainty. As Rita said, being Christian is the answer to all of these problems. And so, if we help one another together, that will be a great gift we can give to the world. So, thank you for being with us, and thank you for persevering together. We're all one in the Eucharist to be who Christ made us to be.
Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you, Rita. It was a privilege just listening to the both of you, and it made me rethink that quote that I started with from Stevenson. I guess a saint is not someone who simply keeps trying, but keeps trying to cooperate with the grace that God freely offers us. And thank you, Kathryn, for accompanying us on this faith, hope, and love journey. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you, Rita, for your beautiful witness, for the beauty of your person, and for sharing Frank's and your story with us today. That really reminds us that we are infinitely more than our worst or lowest moments. And lastly, but certainly not least, thanks to all our viewers. If you value this kind of programming, I encourage you to make a contribution to the Sheen Center. It has been our honor and our privilege to bring you this programming, and we're committed to keep bringing you programming like this, infused by faith, hope, and love. But we can't do it on our own. As Kathryn and Rita said, it takes us all working together. So again, I encourage you to make a contribution. And again, be sure to subscribe to our Sheen Center Talks YouTube channel if you haven't already, and click that bell icon for future notifications. Check out all our online content at sheencenter.org. And join us next week for our final installment of our Wednesday live events, when we will be speaking with Tony, Emmy, and Grammy nominee Harry Connick Jr. So until then, stay safe, be well, God bless.